My name is Sam Dorison. I'm the co-founder and CEO at ReflexAI, and I'm joined today by Dr. Amy Green, the head of research at Hopelab.
Hi, Sam. So good to be here.
It's great to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk a little bit about the work that we've both done together and the work that we are now uh, exploring in our separate roles together.
Yeah. So maybe to start with that
Yeah.
separate roles together piece,
Yeah.
do you want to give a bit of context on how we first started working together?
Yeah. So I think it was 2018. You were actually the one who
We go way back.
right? Who it is? It's in this current environment.
Yeah.
That is way back with everything that's happened in the past 6 years. So we were at the Trevor Project, where you brought me on to really take charge and lead a research team that had a lot of success. And since then, we have found ways to meet our, I think, personal and joint goals of improving the mental health and well-being of people in this country. If there's one thing that we learned from being at the Trevor Project, it was the ways that innovation can really bring forward work that's been sitting for too long in a status quo without seeing as much improvement. And so being at the Trevor Project, working with you, working at a place that had technology, that had a centering on clinical foundations, on data and research, is such an incredible way to really springboard the rest of the possibilities that are out there when it comes to mental health and well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things we saw was that the crisis lens and the suicidal ideation lens of mental health is very specific, right? And it's a different subfield within mental health, which has been growing over the last several decades already. So I was personally very grateful that we could build a research team within the Trevor Project and look at the clinical perspective in particular from the crisis lens.
Absolutely. And it was one of the things, every job that I take, I always have this part where I think, what can I leverage that I already have? And so for Trevor, it was, I'm really knowledgeable about research methods, clinical foundations, best practices in clinical science, and especially working with LGBTQ young people. But for me, suicide prevention was something that I had focused on. I had done some research on, but not in the context of crisis intervention, crisis lines. And it was frankly a new area for me to be able to integrate and learn from what I had already done and figure out, how is this different? And it is different.
Yeah.
We went through the training together. I remember for being trained as a crisis counselor. It's very different than the training that I might give to someone who's a beginning therapist. There are parts that are certainly the same, right? Rapport building, empathy, asking open questions, listening. But there are also parts that are really different when you have just one moment in time with a person who is calling you in need than there are in clinical settings. So that was a really great learning opportunity for me that I've carried forward.
So Amy, one of the things that you pioneered at the Trevor Project was the national survey of over 30,000, I think, LGBTQ.
It depended on the year. We had over 40,000 one year, but generally around 30,000.
We usually set the goal of at least 25,000 different voices, and you exceeded that most years pretty comfortably. But I think one of the things that stood out was just the range of experiences, even within the LGBTQ youth population. So can you talk a bit about the research and those different lived experiences that we were seeing?
Yeah, one of the most incredible parts of having a sample size that large, and they are by far larger than any sample size that I have ever collected or worked with in any other context of my decades-long research career, is that it allows you to look at the nuances of identity, to look intersectionally at the differences between Black, trans, young men, and those who are living a different experience, perhaps someone who is non-binary and not open about their identity yet. We really saw a range of differences in terms of not just the demographic identities that someone holds, but also whether or not they are out to other people about identity, whether or not they have support. And it's really critical to understand all of these different intersections of identities, because these are the people who are coming to the calls. And if we're not able to understand, if we look at this community of LGBTQ young people as a monolith, then what we miss are that there are different needs, different experiences. And it's really critical that our counselors were able to understand those differences to really tap into what those young people were needing and experiencing.
Yeah, and I think one of the other pieces on top of that was, what is their emotional state? And this was something
Absolutely.
that I know we talked a lot about this in different settings, but it's something that's really carried over to Reflex. Is there's a difference between angry and frustrated, or
Absolutely.
scared and uncertain. And when you think about callers to, at that point, the Trevor Project, and now with our work to a wide range of organizations in the mental health space, getting that emotional valence right in a simulation is a critical part of training, so that you're not just preparing potential counselors to talk to someone who's upset, right? You're
Right.
preparing them to talk to s- a specific person with a lot of nuance in their demographics, their lived experience, and their emotional state, and their openness to safety planning in this particular moment on the call. And I think the survey and
Totally.
some of the research did a lot on that.
It's absolutely there, and it's hard to capture that. It's
Hmm.
hard to capture it as a human. So myself, having done role plays with
Yeah.
people, it's hard to tap into that range of emotions when you're not experiencing them. And I think that's a great avenue for technology to be able to come in
Hmm.
to get the nuances so that it's not just one toned. This is anger, and
Yeah.
that's the only negative emotion that we're going to see. And this is sadness, and this is low valence negative emotion. There's so much in the range in between,
Hmm.
and the way that you might respond to someone will be quite different based on the emotional state that they're in.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've really seen in the broader environment of
Hmm.
mental health care is that we have a lot of increased technology use that's been coming in, and it's really layered on different areas. So, for example, there is a lot of excitement about telehealth,
Hmm.
and we saw that, right?
Yeah.
In 2020,
Yeah, we
when
lived it.
we lived it, when we had to figure out call centers that were happening in person, how they transitioned to
Yeah.
being in a distant remote setting, and that's expanded. That's one of the reasons why
Mhm.
I joined Hopelab, was seeing that transition of technology and how quickly it happened, how quickly we were able to make change when we had to.
Yeah.
And that's expanded the ability of people in rural areas to receive care.
Mhm.
And then we've seen things that have been a little less successful, for example, like standalone apps that don't have any human interaction with them, that
Mhm.
are helpful in some ways in a broad range, but perhaps not for higher end clinical challenges. And
Mhm.
now what I'm seeing in this new wave is every conference we go to, everything we go to, AI is everywhere,
Yeah.
right? And there are some places, from a clinical standpoint, what I feel like I've been to enough places to see the consensus, which is we're excited but nervous.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the
There's the
place.
there's the combination of
Right,
emotions right
right.
there.
We're excited but nervous at the same time, and the excitement is really excited.
Yeah.
Having been a clinician, one of the most time-consuming and least exciting parts of the job are documentation, notes, writing reports. AI clinicians are really excited
Yeah.
about the ability of AI in those places.
Mhm.
Another part, things like ReflexAI does, training, quality assurance. Those require a lot of human person power, and
Mhm.
they really put a cap on what we're able to do.
Yeah.
And then we're also starting to see, of course, places that make clinicians a little bit more nervous, which is the direct to patient care,
Mhm.
or a chatbot as a therapist. And I see it everywhere in terms of those places, and there's opportunities, but the excitement sometimes gets tempered by how do we make sure that we do this right? And at Hope Lab, that's something that we really care about, is being ethical, being smart, but still not turning away from that innovation.
Right.
That's how we get ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the buzzwords
Yeah.
even that I think we've heard a lot is human in the loop.
Yeah.
And I think that is a concept which is quite helpful, but it means different things in different settings. And for, AI notes, for example, right? Human in the loop means the clinician reviews it before it
Totally.
goes formally into any sort of documentation system. And I think in the crisis space, human in the loop means really understanding what is the value of having someone on the phone, or
Exactly.
texting and chatting in that moment. But there's so much behind the scenes, whether it's in training or quality assurance, that you can really enhance with AI tools.
Yeah. We've done at Hopelab what we're calling an ethical AI exploration that started this year, and so we've talked to a number of ethicists, both in the academic,
Mm.
in philosophy, and one of the things that's really come out that's been newer to me is the fact that there's also an ethical issue around not using innovation to scale. So if we take Reflex AI as an example, what's the ethical implication of not
Mhm.
allowing for greater training of counselors?
Yeah.
Right? You're capped at a certain level in terms of when you think of things like turnover and trainers and
Mhm.
the human capacity and the time. Like there are a lot of people out there who are calling into crisis lines who want to be served. If we don't have enough counselors who are trained, then
Mhm.
we have longer wait times,
Right.
and that's not something that anyone wants on any side. And so there's also an ethical issue of not finding ways to
Yeah.
integrate the latest technology to better serve our patients. And it's really stuck with me because so much of the ethical conversation, uh, rightly so, is around how do we ethically use AI. But I've heard also from this what happens if we don't ethically use
Right.
AI? That also presents an ethical dilemma of not using the best technology to serve more people.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And an example we use at Reflex a lot is the flight simulator.
Yes.
That if you or I were walking down the jet bridge and we heard, oh yeah, this pilot doesn't believe in flight simulators, our response would be, okay, I think I'll take the next flight.
Right,
Thanks. Right. Like
right.
I'll take the next one. And I think that's true in this space as well. For us in the training world, we see our training tools as the flight simulator equivalent. And how do you
Absolutely.
really prepare someone to sit in the cockpit in the mental health space, which is on the crisis line or supporting patients directly, and you want them to have that practice and you want them to get immediate feedback on how they did in that
Yeah.
practice.
And I would want it.
Right.
Like as a clinician coming in to the world of crisis services, which
Mhm.
is very different than a 50-minute therapy session. I would want to be able to practice as much as possible. There's a lot
Mhm.
of we've been in training rooms, right? There's a lot of nerves that people
Yeah.
have around taking first calls. The ability for them to feel so prepared, like they've done this before. They've seen a variety of contexts. They've seen a variety of identities, that
Right.
it's not just one person role playing. There's something different about a human who's trying to take on different identities in role playing
Yeah.
than the preparation of, wow, I've gone through all of these different scenarios with all of these different identities. I feel so competent
Mhm.
in my ability to take that on. And
Yeah.
I think that's just really powerful, that what we're doing, not just for training, but what we're doing for those humans who are taking on that role,
Mhm.
who are being trained, that they get to go in with competence and confidence.
Mhm. So let's talk about that confidence and confidence. I'm
Yes.
gonna jump off of that. When you think about the skills that clinically
Mhm.
you want to see someone who's on the lines in a crisis setting display, what are some of those clinical skills that you want to see?
Yeah. So clinically, and you and I have talked about this a
Mhm.
number of times in the way that we think about uh, the differences and the similarities between therapy and what happens in a crisis calls. There's these things called common factors or non-specific factors.
Mhm.
They're a big part of the rapport building and the allowing the person to open up to you. And these are things like active listening. So, how do you show active listening, empathy? They're through asking open ended questions that allow the person to provide the response.
Mhm.
They are through reflecting, giving a reflection on what the person says that goes beyond just mimicking their words, so a more complex reflection.
Mhm.
They're through validating. Validating is one of the most powerful clinical skills, and it also translates over into our crisis calls
Mhm.
when we're talking to someone and they hear that sounds really challenging. I can feel and hear the anger in your voice at what you've been going through.
Mhm.
That validation allows that person to continue talking and also to feel heard and seen,
Yeah.
which is a really powerful emotion.
Amy, what are some of the ethical considerations that you're thinking about at Hope Lab when you are really focused on, in particular, the combination of AI and mental health tools?
Yeah, so we, as an impact investor and someone who also supports through connection a lot of organizations in the mental health and tech
Mhm.
space, we see a lot of different applications of AI, and that's what's really pushed us forward into this better understanding of where our ethical principles are and how we look at ethics. And there's a number of things that we look at. One are data use and data privacy when it comes around to AI and the use of data. That's something,
Yeah, it's
especially if you
absolutely
think of
critical.
you think of the end
Yeah.
user and the data that comes in to create these models. Where is that coming from? That also relates to things like bias and equity in the data. At Hopelab, we care deeply about the well-being
Yeah.
of all people, but particularly LGBTQ plus and BIPOC young people.
Mhm.
And as you know, sometimes the data is not reflective of those identities that builds models, and really thinking about, does this AI application equally benefit or even more so benefit those who have those identities? Or is this something we've seen a lot of challenges? I remember back when we went to the Google boot camp as part of the AI accelerator back in our Trevor times, we saw some examples of bias in AI that have stuck with me in terms of ways that AI can go wrong. And that's something
Yeah.
that we have to be incredibly cautious about. We get a lot of different applications of folks coming to us with their products. And what gets us really excited are people who have equity at the forefront, where that's not something that we're asking questions and digging in to find the answers, but that
Mhm.
they come to us and they're talking about the equity
Yeah.
aspects of their project or their program of work that they're doing. And
Yeah.
then also another part is around the clarity around where and how that AI is being used. AI that's being used as like a clinical assisted tool, help people do their jobs better. Human in the loop, as you
Yeah.
referred to it, we get excited about. We get excited because at Hope Lab, we really believe that technology can be used for good and that the field of mental health care needs technology to catch
Mhm.
up with the rest of innovation. But we also need to be really cautious about making sure we're using applications that are truly benefiting the populations we care about.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Sam.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Reflex AI and how you all have taken on looking at the clinical best use of AI,
Mhm.
as well as how that relates to equity.
Yeah, I think at Reflex, you laid out a series of areas to focus on, right? Data
Yeah.
privacy and data security, really thoughtful development of underlying data sets, how those data sets are then incorporated into models and what those models do, right?
Yeah.
So a whole string, and we've seen that exact same string at Reflex, and I can definitely rattle off a few things because
Yeah.
you asked the question. The first one is around data privacy and data security. Security is actually the number one value at Reflex. So we have a set of organizational values, and right at the top is security because we know the importance of the data that we're trusted with
Yeah.
for our partners, and that means HIPAA compliance, SOC 2 compliance, multi-factor authentication. We train our entire team on cybersecurity every year. 100% of our team is actually trained on AI ethics.
Love that.
We do an AI ethics training for everyone, regardless of role, because we believe everyone has a part to play in this prioritization within the organization. So we start there, and then we get into the data set world, and we know if you start with a data set that has been very thoughtfully developed, it is much, much more likely that you can deploy models with that data set that are also equitable, right?
Totally.
And maybe put the other way, if you start with a data set that is not
Yeah.
representative, I don't feel like there's anyone smart enough to figure out how to then turn that into a model that magically eliminates bias,
Right.
right? So for us, what that meant was, as we're thinking about different examples of levels of empathy or different examples of open-ended questions that we want our models to be able to identify in the course of a simulation or a crisis conversation, those are sourced broadly. In some of our work in the veteran space, we had over 500 veterans giving input and providing examples. And then as those examples are evaluated, having clinicians with a wide range of backgrounds, and certainly you are one of them that we have a privilege to work with, but several clinicians from different spaces with different experiences and different areas of expertise, all weighing in on how these examples are being labeled within the system so that when then they're used to train models, the models have learned from a very broad set of examples, sourced very broadly, and evaluated already from day one very broadly.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit more
Yeah.
because you may not know this because you're doing it, but it for Hope Lab, one of the things that we care most about, and our work again is with young people,
Hmm.
is having the users centered in the experience.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes an afterthought
Right.
for folks. And that's very antithetical to the way that Hope Lab for its
Hmm.
entire history has operated.
Right.
How did you come to the place where for Reflex AI that you knew that your products would be developed with the people that will be
Yeah.
impacted by it?
I think it came from, in many ways, growing up in this space, right?
Mhm.
That my first involvement in the crisis world and in the mental health world was as a frontline responder on Trevor's digital crisis services. And that was, wow, over a decade ago at this point.
Yeah.
And I went through training. And I felt in going through training that I wish I had had experience practicing with a wide range of personas.
Yeah.
And we had fantastic trainers at Trevor,
Mhm.
but the ability of trainers to consistently role play as the same persona is limited, right?
Totally.
And as someone who also led the role plays, I can say, it's very, very hard
It is.
to step into those different roles. And if we were going to do it realistically, which if you're going to do it, it's worth doing well, right?
Totally.
If you're going to do it realistically, you have to understand the different personas that you're seeking to simulate. And that means getting that input. Right? And that means understanding the different sentence structure that folks at different ages use. That means understanding different, what we call response curves. So different folks, when they reach out to a crisis line, might start much more open. They might start much more closed off. They might respond differently to empathy. They might respond differently to open ended questions. And really thinking deeply about that. It's quite exciting, right?
Yeah.
Because we're doing this in a way that has not been done before, but it also just translates very directly into the product. And I remember, I'll give you one anecdote on this. I was in a meeting with one of our new partners, and we were walking through one of the simulations, and this was a relatively high risk simulation, so it was a serious conversation, and they started laughing, and I thought to myself, oh boy, like we're about to be told this is not meeting the bar, right?
Yeah.
Which is never a fun moment for us with a new partner. And I said, I tried to ask a neutral, open-ended question. Oh, is there something you want to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Not make an assumption. And the response was, I actually can't believe there's not a human on the other side of this.
Oh,
And for us, that is the bar, right?
yeah.
The bar is these simulations will never be 1000% realistic, right? Because human lived experience is so complex,
Mm.
but it can get really close. And
Yeah.
if you get really close and you have that moment of, I can't believe there's not a human there, that means the trainee is also being put on the spot in their practice. And that means they're really helping themselves to figure out, where are our skills already? Where do I need to continue to develop? So that's the kind of moment that drives me. I know for the other Reflex team members in the room, that was a worrying but then fun moment
Yeah.
as well.
I love the story, and I
Yeah.
also love the reminder that this came from your personal experience, that the way that you think about developing these tools,
Yeah.
that you were in it.
Yeah.
You were deep in it for a long
Right.
time, not just as someone who was making decisions about the directions of technology, but someone who was on those calls,
Yeah.
in taking text, taking live
Yeah.
crisis interventions, and that how much that frames the way that you approach the work.
100%. And one of our other colleagues that John
Yeah.
Callery, he was the head of technology at the
Yeah.
Trevor Project, which meant he and his team were responsible for evaluating other tech vendors for, do they meet the cybersecurity requirements that would be expected in order to be part of the Trevor technology ecosystem. So now on the Reflex side, we can actually say, oh yeah, we know how you evaluate. We know that you have a high bar. Ask us any cybersecurity question you want. Here's our HIPAA audit. Here's our SOC 2 audit. Here's our cybersecurity checklist. Here's our access policies, right? And
Yeah.
we can provide every single one of those because we were the ones asking for them for so many years.
Yeah. So you and John
Yeah.
are the co-founders of Reflex AI. And
Mhm.
I remember it was a while back now when I got a call learning that you and John were going to take this leap and take what the foundations of what you had started to ideate and develop
Yeah.
at the Trevor Project and really take it to a broader audience. And I remember us being in the Google training when we first started diving into AI, and I remember how good it felt for you to pull me in the very beginning as a clinician and a researcher, and maybe talk a little bit about that formation of how you got to the place where you're like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna take this and make it big and amazing.
Yeah. If you had asked me in 2018, would we be developing technology for the mental health space, I would have said, "What do you even mean by that?" Right? The question wouldn't even have registered, let alone gotten a particular answer. But as we were doing this work at the Trevor Project with some of these simulations, we saw the impact. And then in 2021, being recognized on the Time 100 Best Inventions of the Year, I think that was the first actually Gen AI use case on the Time 100, right? So it was even before ChatGPT really blew up. And we started getting questions about, this seems really cool. Can we use it? We have the same challenges that it seems like you are trying to solve. Can you help us? And that got, for me and John, and now a lot of our teammates at Reflex, really got the wheel spinning on, could we bring this to even more organizations and do it in a way that if we were on the other side of the table, we would want. So I remember, I think I called you, it might have been right around the 4th of July weekend. I think I might have interrupted a barbecue or something.
I was in Mammoth Lakes with very little cell phone reception, but you were important enough that I took the call. Yeah.
I appreciate it. We go back far enough. And I think the first conversation we had was, can we do this in a way that makes clinical sense? Because if not, it wasn't going to work, first and foremost. And it wasn't something that we would want to try to kind of make work without that clinical lens. So I remember that conversation. I don't think I knew where you were for 4th of July, but I do remember being excited enough and wanting to get a clinical input as soon as possible.
And I remember just the excitement that I had, knowing how incredibly, I'm gonna gloat on you for a little bit, but like how incredibly talented, smart, and innovative you and John were, and to see the two of you joining up to do something. Outside of everything else, I've spent my entire career hoping to see a change in the mental health of this country, right? And I'm in my mid-40s now, and I have not done anything else. Professionally, that's all I've done. And I think sometimes about people who I've seen retire and feel at the end of their career like they really haven't seen that change. And it makes me so excited when we see new things, when we see new companies coming up, when they're done in such a thoughtful, ethical, clinically centered way that makes me think we can have bigger impact here. Because that's all I'm a little bit of an impact junkie. I just want more impact.
That's a good time.
I want more impact in mental health. And so when you and John made that call, I remember the excitement of, one, how can I help? I think that was immediate the thing. Like, I'm in, like, whatever support you need, sign me up. And also just the excitement of something being able to scale the thing that you had put together, not just being this is great for this organization. And now because you could move on you're both very talented. You could have moved on to a ton of, you could have hopped out of this space, but you didn't. You went deeper and broader. And it's just really powerful to see that type of impact work. Let's go forward a little bit. One of the things that excites me most about what you, John, and the ReflexAI team is that you continue to innovate and you continue to expand what's possible. So what's next? Can you give me any insights of where ReflexAI is going in terms of new innovations?
Yeah, we can absolutely look ahead under the hood a bit. One of the things that we'll be launching in the next few weeks that I'm super excited about is voice-based simulation. And this is something that we've had on our minds probably since we first started engaging with Siri and Alexa, with voices that no one would confuse with realistic voices. But in the last year, we've seen very realistic voices powered by AI. And for us, realistic means they're emotionally complex. So you can simulate frustration versus anger, and they're different, right? And voices as well that come from diverse communities. So when you hear the voices, whether that's gender, age, race, many, many different backgrounds that are incorporated into these different voices. So that means we can now build on top of those voices and have voice-based simulation. So not only are you practicing text-based conversations that allow you to utilize a lot of the skills you have in training or that you've learned in the mental health space, but now engage with those skills in a vocal way. So that's something that we've already seen huge demand for, and is something that even in the initial pilots and prototypes, people just love.
Can you imagine if you think back 5-6 years ago, if someone told you there's going to be an incredibly realistic, nuanced persona that you'll be able to talk to on a crisis line to prepare you for the calls that you're going to have, how amazing that would have felt to be able to have that type of preparation?
Yeah, I think I would have said that's great for the next generation
Right.
that will be able to do that. I wouldn't have thought it would be us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's happened so fast, not just because the technology is moving quickly, but because the needs are there, right? That the use cases of these AI tools across spaces is quite high. And that gives us a real opportunity to say, this space deserves this technology, right? That so many spaces see a lot of innovation every single year, right? The innovation in food delivery has been through the roof. And I think it's really important that in the mental health space, we can also say innovation has been through the roof. And that's just one example.
Yeah. I think that's how you and I got to where we are in our current positions, is the idea that, for me, clinical psychology, mental health care, that we deserve innovation too.
Right.
This is really important, life-saving work often. That is, I don't know if you've ever seen some of the systems that people have operated under, but like antiquated is sometimes a mild word for where the field has been. And you and I have said this before. I'm like, this field deserves innovation and deserves tech.
Yeah. I can give you one other example of that too. So we're doing a lot of work recently around risk assessment. And in the vast majority of conversations in the crisis space and in the mental health space more broadly, I think as we think about prevention, it's really important to ask effective risk assessment questions. And historically, that has been something that you needed a human to check. So a great example of a risk assessment question, I really hear you when it sounds like you've been struggling for months. So I want to check in. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Right? It's direct, it's non-judgmental, and it's tailored to the conversation, right?
Perfect.
Great risk assessment question. The alternative to that, you wouldn't do anything stupid like try to kill yourself, right? Still a direct question, but it's completely stilted and clearly has a judgmental undertone.
Clinically ill-advised.
Clinically ill-advised is the more neutral way to put it, right? And when we've been now configuring models to identify effective risk assessment questions so that you can see across all the simulations that your organization's running, or across, in many cases, 100% of live interactions, right, that are flowing through Reflex tools securely, you can identify the difference between those, which means you can see who is asking questions that are in the clinically advised set versus the clinically ill-advised set. And before that had required a human to judge every single one. Now you can have the humans reviewing it and then engaging with those particular individuals who might need help improving those skills, right? And that's an innovation that wasn't just core natural language processing from several years ago, but now really anchored in Gen AI tools.
Well, and that's part of the power of ReflexAI, is that it's the incredibly powerful, I'll call it the flight simulator, as you all do, the personas that train people, but also the ability to really jumpstart in a way that's never been able to be done before, quality assurance and quality improvement. And that's another place that differs from a clinical encounter where maybe you have one person for 50 minutes, one provider. Crisis call volume can be quite high. Even in a given day, it's not feasible to have a human supervisor go over every single transcript, every single call, but you could do that now, right? Is that?
Yeah, not only is it not feasible to do it manually, no one wants that job,
Right.
right? That would not be the world's most fun job, right?
Yeah.
Is reviewing the transcripts to look for these one or two particular things.
Yeah.
And that's all you're doing. And you have to hit 100%, right? That's a part of the work that quality assurance teams do when they're looking for 20 plus things in a conversation as part of a performance review process and as part of a continuous learning process. But that is not the only thing you'd want them to do.
Yeah.
And if you tried to make it 100%, you would have to make it a lot of people's full-time job.
Well, I'm curious, how quick could someone get feedback on their performance in a situation? Because that's one of the things that's also been a challenge. We know, like, in best practices, giving someone feedback as close to an interaction is the best way to make change. But what often ends up happening is that at the end of the month, they pick a random case when we're doing quality assurance, and the person doesn't even, they've had so many other cases, interactions, that one doesn't stand out.
Yeah.
With a tool like this, how quickly could a team give feedback to a counselor about their performance?
Yeah. It's near instant, I think is the piece. And we've thought about this a lot from adult learning best practices.
Right.
So you and I talk a lot more about the clinical best practices, but from an adult learning perspective, you want feedback that is instant and actionable.
Absolutely.
And hopefully focuses on both strengths and opportunities. And that's what we've seen in our simulations is the second you finish the simulation, you get a feedback card. And the feedback card has a wide range of dimensions: the opening protocol, the risk assessment, empathy, openness, responsiveness. The list goes on. And within each one, it's a very intuitive, are you meeting or exceeding expectations? Is there some opportunities for improvement? Or is this was a real challenge, right? So red, yellow, green. And you get the qualitative on why, right? So if you're getting yellow on empathy, is that because you weren't using that many empathetic statements? Or was it because your empathetic statements were a little generic? Things like, that sounds really hard versus it makes total sense that you feel frustrated when your friends don't call you back. Right. And being able to pinpoint, here's the opportunity for you in that moment. And then the trainers can see it, right? And they can work with you on it if needed. It's become you see a much faster learning process, I think is probably the best way to put it. And you see a learning process that is anchored on learning, right? That when you get immediate feedback, you can learn from it quickly because it's still fresh in your mind. And then you can quickly apply it to the next interaction you're going to have.
So we've talked a lot about our shared excitement over the work and what you've done at ReflexAI. But one thing I don't know is, where did the name ReflexAI come from? I know you have meaning behind it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the short answer is we picked the name intentionally. The slightly longer answer is we picked the name because of what we believe about our shared values with the partners that we work with. And for us, that meant we believe in the value of human-to-human interaction, whether that's in the crisis world, whether it's in peer support, whether it's in mental health more broadly, or even physical health, and in so many other areas, that the human-to-human interaction is valuable. And if you're preparing someone to have that human-to-human interaction, what you're really doing is building up their reflexes, that you're building up in training. They have the knowledge and ability to react really quickly to a crisis situation or some other form of escalation. And then when they're on the lines and we're focused on the quality assurance side of what we do, we're continuing to ensure with our partners that their folks have those reflexes and that they're able to deliver on the promises that they're making to the individuals reaching out. So we put reflex in the name because it is fundamentally a human-focused word. And it's about responding in the moment to someone reaching out, which is what gets us up in the morning to do the work.
So thoughtful. I love that. So curious, now that it's not just you and I who have a relationship in terms of the clinical and research insights that I've provided to ReflexAI, but Hopelab, the organization where I work, is now also a partner of ReflexAI. Can you talk about what got you excited about the partnership between Hopelab and ReflexAI?
First and foremost, it's about the people at Hopelab. That organizations are made up of people. We all know that. And the folks working at Hopelab every day, including you, Aaron, other members of the team that we get to engage with, really care about the work. And every time I talk to someone at Hopelab, I learn something. And that could be about how to think about the work that Reflex does. It could be how to think about innovation more broadly. It could be about something clinical. I learned something, and I think the folks on the Reflex team learned something from those interactions. So if we're not learning and having shared values, we wouldn't be working with Hopelab. But I think even more broadly than that, the vision of Hopelab of innovation to serve communities really resonates. That's why we started Reflex.
Yeah.
And if you look at the history of Hopelab, really from day one, whether that's engaging in the nonprofit world, the for-profit world, Hopelab has really brought that to the table in the mental health space in a really compelling way, which meant as we were thinking about partners for Reflex, Hopelab was on the list quite early.
Yeah. I think the thing that really joins both organizations is tech can sometimes get a bad rep when it comes to mental health, right? Especially in the world that I'm in terms of young people and things like social media and technology. But we all have this underlying belief that you can look at the harms or you can find ways to minimize the harms and really look at the possibilities and the potential of technology. And when we do that, we're able to innovate and find ways to break through some of the challenges that we've had that have really been immovable for decades, including youth mental health, including veteran mental health. But how do we move forward in a way where we're seeing progress and better outcomes? And we both organizations have this belief that we can use technology in ways for good, and that's going to help us get there.
Well, Amy, thank you for taking the time to really dive in. We do so much of this work behind the scenes with you and our other clinical advisors. It's really a pleasure to get to have this conversation and share it with others. So I just want to say thank you again for the work that you do and for doing that work with Reflex.
Yeah. And thank you for the conversation, but also for bringing me along from the very pre-start days of this work that you've been doing, and for the commitment that you all have to the things that I care about, clinical best practices, data, ethics, and just being an overall great human and partner.
Thanks, Amy.